Chicago. I sort of lean to the same aisle as Jay does, I guess, in politics, but I want you to know I'm fair and balanced. My mother's a Republican, and she gripes about all the time. She calls up and tells me doesn't like my politics, so if you feel the same, God bless you. You know, I also extremely pleased that he talked about my investment banking background. I generally tend to tell people, don't talk about that now, talk about the Marine Corps. It works a lot better. Investment bankers not always being the most popular. But I am proud of my business heritage, my participation here in this community and the state of Illinois. It is, I don't like to say that I'm a third senator from Illinois, but I do care about fighting Illini, making sure that they get the kind of resources to have a great university to fall to. And certainly the University of Chicago. And it is something that is carries with me the values that I acquired in growing up in a community that cared about each other. And the opportunities that were presented to me in my life are ones that I'm trying to carry forward in the United States Senate, what I'm giving back. You know, it's great to be from New Jersey. We have both the Devils and the Nets, if you haven't noticed. So we're puffed up a little bit about our sports teams. But you've all had great success there in many ways. And I actually look at our two communities very much alike. We have great metropolitan communities that are drivers to sort of the defining element of it, but we have great diverse suburban communities. Actually, New Jersey is just one great, big, diverse suburban community, although it is still the Garden State, and we have our rural areas as well. And my point being is that they really reflect the diversity of America. If you look at those communities, both their the diverse ethnic and religious and economic backdrops that make up our communities, they're very much the same. We have a lot of the same challenges in Illinois and New Jersey. And hey, we even have diversity in politicians. You've got Steve Forbes on the right, you've got Jon Corzine on the left. You've got a couple of rich guys arguing about how we're supposed to divide the pie. But that is actually what America is all about. I hope that people don't doubt for a moment that I believe in one of the fundamental values is that this is a land of opportunity and responsibility. It's also one that is embracing capitalism. And I may be a Democrat, but I'm an ardent believer in the market system, one that is orderly maintained, it's fair, it provides opportunity. I actually think we need some checks and balances once in a while. I don't think we should follow the principle of survival of the fittest. So when you see some of the policies that I might talk about, they come from that kind of perspective. This is a time, of great challenges for the nation. I can't talk about all of them, so I will talk about the economy. It's one of those things that I have the greatest background. But let me just say that the discussions that we have about the structure of our foreign policy, the roadmap in the Israeli-Palestinian situation, the whole debate we have about the role of civil liberties and court functioning in our system are real and present debates that we have on the floor of the United States Senate. We're going to be in the midst of actually getting to a conclusion on a prescription drug benefit in the next week or two. So there are many issues. I'd be happy to take questions at the end. But I do want to talk about the economy because it is a real and present issue, certainly in both of our states. You have above average unemployment levels here in Illinois, about 200,000 lost jobs. By the way, I am a Democrat, so if I have a little bit of a partisan spin, forgive me. I'm not. I actually want to get to the right result, the one that lifts all boats and creates an economy that works for all. And so I try to talk from that perspective. You can never ever quite get away from as a United States Senator, as a Democratic United States Senator, from having some perspective that takes it in another direction. But We've come through a recession, but unfortunately we've had a pretty jobless recovery. I call it almost a sleepwalking recovery, and I think we need to do something different than what we've been doing. The fact is that here in Illinois and in New Jersey, we have one thing in common. We have $5 billion budget deficits at the state level, which is creating enormous pressure on the delivery of services and the potential for tax hikes and other changes in the basic core of the economy that is hard for Americans. 49 out of 50 states are in that same situation. It's mind-boggling to think that the state of California has a $36 billion budget deficit. I remember back when I was at Continental Illinois, Jay, that was what we were talking about as an atrocity with regard to fiscal policy in the United States. And now you have it at a state. We have over $100 billion, or at $100 billion for us. It is tough, and I find it difficult that our policies seem to be on a single note. The tax cuts are the solution. Federal income tax cuts are the single solution for everything. I like to say in some of my speeches that we've changed every single senior policymaker on economic policy in the current administration, but we keep the same policy regardless of understanding the line describing it. And I think it is a real problem that we have undermined our fiscal stability in this country in a way, but it's very dangerous in conjunction with the rapidly approaching retirement of folks like me that I look at in the mirror, the baby boomers. We're going to go from about 35 million to about 75 million people over 65 in this country over the next 15 to 20 years. And put that against Medicare, put it against Social Security, and you look at where our federal budget deficits are today, where is that going to leave us? And I think there is a real problem that needs to be addressed, and it's clear to the president and ought to be understood. And I think that it was very hard to understand why we felt so impelled to change economic policy coming out of the 1990s, and see why we might wanted some more checks and balances on how our accounting system worked, how corporate governance worked. But last time I checked, we created 22.5 million jobs. We increased productivity from below 1.5% up to about 3%. We balanced the budget. We actually got into a position where we were projecting some budget surpluses of, at the start of 2001 of almost $5.6 trillion. Today, we're projecting for the same time frame about estimates run for anywhere from $2 to $4 trillion negative swing from that 5.6. Last time I looked at an income statement, if you had a $9 trillion negative cash swing, somebody might ask whether the boss knew what the hell he was doing. And so I think there is a serious issue to be looked at. We've lost 3 million private sector jobs in the last 2.5 years. It's about 2.5 in the economy in general. That's because government actually is growing, which is a head scratcher given the philosophies of the administration. 7 out of 9 quarters, we've seen business investment decline. By the way, some of this stuff is current. We had 17 weeks in a row where unemployment applications are growing at over 400,000 a week, which is the generally accepted level, which people suggest that there is a decline in employment going on, not a growth. I think there's a real problem. And we have the trade deficit numbers come out today. We're going to be running over a $500 billion trade deficit this year. Conjunction with a weaker dollar, it is also a very dangerous position to be in. We have to borrow $1.5 billion plus every single day to even out our current account in this country. And so I hope people continue to be confident in the United States, because we need to be able to absorb a lot of cash. Again, I don't understand really why we felt such imperative to change the nature of the tax structure. Capitalism thrived in the 1990s. We know about the 22.5 million jobs. And frankly, it was a period when more people became millionaires than any time in the history of this nation. Productivity grew, a whole series of things. Many more people moved, those poorest in our society moved up in the income scale. And frankly, class warfare, which I don't like and I think ought to be expunged from the basic debates we have in society, to subsume the view that rising tides lift all boats. I believe in that. I think that that's how we ought to be formulating public policy. On the other hand, tax cut after tax cut, in my view, is not the direction that is actually going to change things, particularly when you only limit income taxes at the federal level. Because there's so much more going on in this country than just that. And particularly when I think it is going to create a debt tax on Americans that's far going to outweigh the kinds of benefits that most Americans are going to receive. Different people will dispute these numbers, but it's not far from right. 53% of American families get on the latest tax cut less than $100 from the so-called $350 billion tax cut. And I know you're all reading about the child tax credit, which has been quite a brouhaha in Washington, trying to straighten out whether people who are making a minimum wage, people $10,000 to $26,000 going to get a child tax credit. It's actually 12 million kids, a high percentage of enlisted people in the military are left out of the child tax credit. Somehow or another, it doesn't seem to make sense in a world when we're asking men and women to put their lives at stake in Afghanistan and Iraq. We're somehow going to leave them out of this proposition. We only want to focus on income taxes. Remember, 4 out of 5 Americans pay more in payroll taxes, that's FICA for Social Security, Medicare, than they pay in income taxes. To me, I think we've got some wrong-headed views. Even when we're trying to correct this, and I actually think Republican leadership, particularly J.L. Grassley, has done a terrific job of trying to get through a fix of this child tax credit. It's been very cooperative, it's been a very bipartisan effort. Parties go over to the House to try to deal with it. We've got $22 going to people in upper income brackets to fix the $1 that we're going to give to the child tax credit. So these are real substantive debates that show the real choices that are coming out of the political system. I happen to be a Democrat, as I suggested. I'm also in charge of the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee, so I have a view. I have a view because I think it's responsible to make sure that Americans know what are choices that we're going to be taking when we underwrite the kinds of actions that we're putting in place. So there is a real choice of whether we're going to invest in our educational system. Passed bipartisan Leave No Child Behind. It's supposed to increase in investment in education $10 billion a year. Increase with one this year. Veterans benefits, health programs. I, for one, don't understand how we're going to actually pay for this Medicare prescription drug benefit. We're going to pass before the 4th of July, given how the demographics of America are going to change over the next few years and continue to provide Medicare and Social Security. We're actually using up all of the payroll taxes to fund a lot of these tax cuts. To me, it's a real head scratcher. And I hope a lot of folks read Tom Friedman's article this week because he really talked about the trade-off between business in America and tax cuts. And he said we Democrats are lousy at words. We've allowed ourselves to be tax and spend folks. When we really talk about tax cuts, we're talking about service cuts. And those are real deals. Where we're going to have a transportation system, where we're going to have the educational system and other things. I think this is the debate for domestic purposes that we should have in 2004. We should lay it out in clear terms. These tax cuts don't come without real consideration on the impact of people. And I also believe that you need to look at them in the context of what deficits will do for the country over a long period of time. I happen to like to cite one economist. This is my favorite because actually I think he's one of the brilliant guys that came out of MIT. It's called his name's Greg Mankiw. He is the chairman of the President's Council of Economic Advisors. He has, I guess, what is substituted for Paul Samuelson's economics, the Econ 101 textbook that is now used in many of the classrooms across the country. And it's always interesting to put together what somebody says before they get the political office and what they say after they get there. It's always a little tougher. But I think it actually responds to a lot of the fundamentals that I believe. Quote unquote from Professor Mankiw in his book. When the government reduces national savings by running a budget deficit, interest rates rise and investment falls. Because investment is important for long-term economic growth, government deficits reduce the economy's growth rate. Fact is, supply-side economics, which is being practiced, in my view, is potentially undermining to our long-run health, not creating investment, but actually challenging it because there will be enormous challenges to the relative level of interest rates. The one thing that is absolutely certain is we're going to have $2.5 trillion worth of debt expenditures over the next 10 years associated with the deficits that are expected to be. That is $30,000 worth of interest expense for a family of four in America. That doesn't fit that well with that $100 tax cut for 53% of Americans as we go forward. I think we're putting on an enormous shift of where tax burdens, debt burdens lie in this country, to a lot of undermines. You can say that with regard to what it's going to do to our state governments and a lot of other things. I'm not going to dwell, but I do believe this is a fundamental debate that this nation needs to have. We need to get it laid out, and that's certainly going to be what I believe is an agenda item for Democrats to talk about, but I also think it's one that we need to make sure that happens. I think it's particularly harsh for states. It goes back to that $100 billion. And I just cite Grover Norquist, who was really stating how I think a lot of Republicans feel. He says, I hope a state goes bankrupt. And that's his view about these budget deficits. And I just think we need to push back on this kind of thing. We need to go forward. I could say a lot more about tax cuts in the framework. You all know about Sunset's $350 billion tax cut, which is really almost anybody's projection that sunsets don't exist. $800 billion, maybe $1 trillion. I think we've got a little Enron economics going on here, or accounting going on in the national government. There's, again, I think a lot of the issues are not being brought out on the issue of people. I just say that there are lots of ideas out there that will work. I'm going to stand here and say I think Democrats ought to stand up to roll back some of the tax cuts. I particularly like, for my own personal interest, the dividend exclusion and the capital gains cut. But I don't think that's the choice we should be making. I think we ought to be investing in our schools. We ought to be putting resources into the National Science Foundation, stem cell research, and a whole series of things, a whole series of moves forward in the society. We are not going to have. I think we could have had a stimulus program. I believe strongly in the payroll tax holiday or the wage tax credit. We are favoring capital over wages. I don't understand that. There are a heck of a lot more people that earn wages get resources from capital. I believe we ought to encourage capital formation, but there are other ways to do it other than just differentiating the tax rate. And so I hope that we can take up this, and as the chairman of the Democratic Senate and the Democratic Commission, I think you're going to hear maybe even more articulate sources than me, but we are going to bang on this issue over and over and over. 3 million lost jobs versus 22.5 million lost. Creation of jobs, balanced budgets versus $30,000 worth of family debt. I think are tough decisions to get going. I come from Willie Station, as you said, it's got about 50 people. They got a lot of common sense down there. They have to balance their budgets. They understand how this works. And I think this debate needs to go on. There are lots of important issues. I am thrilled to be here. I'm always, I don't know whether my University of Chicago professors would like everything I had to say here, but we really need a debate on fundamental economics in this country, and I want all of us to get our economy going, make sure that rising tides don't go. Thank you very much.
Graciously agreed to take a question. This is on cable, so if you're going to ask a question, just go right there, tell them your name, and let it go.
Herb Sohn, I work at the University of Chicago, and just recently some of your professors in the business school talked about health as an asset. And they realized that health and wealth are the same if you use health as an asset. And I just want to get your feelings on access to health care and also tort reform, because we're very concerned about losing a lot of physicians, you know, that people need because of the elevated premiums. If you'd be so kind. Thank you.
Great. Well, first of all, when I ran for the United States Senate, I ran on a program of universal health insurance. It happened to be employer-based insurance. It actually was a derivative, not quite so expensive, but a derivative of the Gephardt program. Actually, the same professors worked with Congressman Gephardt and myself in putting it together. We've got one problem. We can't pay for it. We don't have the resources to be able to get to universal health insurance. Unfortunately, in many ways we have, but it's through the emergency rooms and federal health clinics, through lots of formulations that are a lot more expensive and don't have anything to do with preventative care. So I think it's one of those things that I believe really relates to the theme of what I was talking about. I think we got our priorities wrong. I don't believe in confiscatory tax structure, but I do believe that we ought to have enough revenue to be able to deal with some of these issues that we're backdoor costing ourselves. Universal health insurance is absolutely one of them. I don't believe in a single payer system, but we need to have a system that brings it in. The tort reform issue is a tough one. We're having a hell of a debate in New Jersey about whether we have a 250 cap, a 500 cap, an override pool that provides for it. I believe that we ought to make sure in a democracy that we keep access to the court system. I'm not for throwing out the jury system. I don't believe in venue like we've seen down in Madison County here in Illinois as a basis of how the world should work, and we ought to get to long-term settlements of it. On the other hand, we shouldn't just slap the door on all these things. I think there are some steps, some derivatives of some of the programs on medical malpractice that I can support. I think most of my Democratic colleagues will, actually Dianne Feinstein's leading the call to get it down to that 250 cap. I'd like to have a little bit different version on it, but we need some reform without taking away the right to have access at the courts. And I think the venue shopping issue is maybe one of the most egregious problems that we have.
Hi, my name is Andrew Hyman. I work for PricewaterhouseCoopers, and I have a question about efficient. No, Starbucks questions. No, I have a question about efficient use of Democratic senatorial campaign funds. I'm very concerned when I see, obviously I'm a Democrat, we're behind the Republicans in fundraising. I think we may be behind, but I don't think we're necessarily using the resources most efficiently. I'm especially talking about TV advertising. You're probably quite aware of that. When you did your advertising in New York, you spent more money than Clinton or Lazio on New York ads in 2000, I believe. And also, every time, for example, when you're advertising to your voters in New Jersey, 2 out of 3 people that saw your ads in New York couldn't vote for you because they're in New York and Connecticut. Mm-hmm. And for example, you had like,
Actually, I spent less than both of them, but I had to spend it in Philadelphia as well.
Right.
Plus, I had a primary, which,
Right, but I'm saying is, what can we do about getting more effective use of television dollars by advertising on cable networks in a specific targeted fashion? I think like 80 or 90% of U.S. homes already have cable. What can we do about moving towards that? And also,
it's a good question. I think there's a lot of thought that needs to be brought there. But just remember, Bill O'Reilly's got the most widely watched cable show in prime time, something like 700,000 households.
But you could have like a SpongeBob SquarePants and a Discovery Channel, you're going to get roughly as many people. What I'm saying is, I just want, what can we do? And also, and get the parental vote too. My other question is, why are we constantly relying on these Washington communications firms and local races? Because let's face it, if you're running a Senate race, I'm Mr. TV man. I have the guy I can buy from Preparation H or I can buy from the senatorial campaign. I know that Preparation H is going to be there after the election. You're not going to be there until 6 more years. Why should I give you good slots? But these guys from DC seem to come in, they pay the max, because that's how consultants are compensated. What can we do to make it more of a local thing so we get better ad buys? Thank you.
Great questions. I'm not sure everybody is interested. I am very interested in everything that you're talking about because I think we waste a lot of money. We also put out a lot of generic stuff that doesn't really motivate voters, in my view. Voters end up voting for people they like and that they can relate to. They want to hear what they stand for. But most of the stuff, in my view, I'm for a prescription drug benefit and I'm going to protect social security. I don't think it's like motivating to most people. And we end up spending a far too high a percentage of the resources raised in the Democratic Party, at least in the senatorial campaign, on television advertising. We have different strategies. And necessity is it actually is the mother of creativity, and I think we're going to have some real changes about how we do it. I think relative, the trade-off between organizing, get out the votes, and get registration, and getting more voters to the polls relative to television, I think is a powerful tool. And I think that trade-off versus some of the use of cable and some of the more effective use of direct mail, targeted in a much more disciplined way, will be much more effective use of our dollars. I have to tell you, and I do have a business background. I am very frustrated with some of the thinking that we have. We have 200,000 names in our direct names in our mail file on a national basis for the DSCC. The average age is 75 years old. We got to solicit it fast. So my mother's one of them. But the reality is we have not given the kind of business thought to how we run our campaigns anywhere near what Republicans have. They've been on this, from the mid-'70s, and we have to have a revolution thought about it. Hopefully that I will at least have had some ability to change some of the priorities. Examine, because I'm not actually sure whether your suggestions are right or wrong, but I know generic advertising pulls very little. And so we've got a lot to do, and we're working on it, because I want to pass off something that goes on beyond just
Talking about cable, too close. Jeff Berkowitz, host and producer of Public Affairs, airing every Monday night, 8:30 p.m. on cable channel 21 throughout the city of Chicago. We don't accept advertising yet, but talk to me after the program, we'll work something out. But seriously, you said you wanted a debate, especially on the issues of the economy. And let me throw out a few things that I think, if the other side were here, what they might say, and see if you can address them specifically. Not that I necessarily believe in them, but being fair and balanced. He said, why would the Republicans change in their approach to the economy given the success of the 90s? And I think most people would concede that the expansion in the 90s was pretty successful.
There's also a bipartisan effort on balancing the budget, doing a lot of the things that brought change. It wasn't just Democrats.
Right, indeed, they might say that was the cause, that it was the Republican Congress who controlled spending and blah, blah, blah. And, but that's not the point. The point is, they might say that in the last 6 months of the Clinton administration, we were heading toward a recession. And that obviously, that continued in the early months of the Bush administration. So something differently had to be done. And they would say that most Democrats before were Keynesians and believed in deficits in times of a recession, perhaps even tax cuts, pointing to JFK in the early 60s.
What's the question?
So the question is, wouldn't that be something that Democrats would support? They would support deficits as Keynesians. They would support tax cuts as ways of stimulating the economy, especially cuts in marginal rates to give, as you talked about, incentives to work, save, and invest. And the second part of the question is, September 11th, which you didn't mention, wasn't that a great shock to the economy that tax cuts or any other stimulus to the economy you might need something like that to offset that shock of September 11th?
Well, first of all, I'm not advocating balanced budgets during periods of recession. I actually believe what candidate Bush said, that in periods of recession and periods of war and other things, you could actually run a budget deficit. It's building in structural deficits that go on for decades and multiple decades, particularly when you're facing a demographic bubble, that I think ought to shape policies so that you would have short-run stimulus, pump priming efforts that, not unlike what the Federal Reserve does, take interest rates down to virtually zero so that you could refinance mortgages and put money in to keep the economy going. I think that's all positive. I don't have a problem with that. It sounds kind of Keynesian to me. And that's what we should have done, not change the structure or the fiscal balance of the country over a long period of time. I do understand the shock that September 11th came, but I think if you look at actually the outgrowth of consumer spending, and I don't think it had a damn thing to do with rebates. I think it had to do with America believing that we had to pull together and we needed to get out and go to the malls, do the things that go forward. I'm not sure there wasn't actually a plus for the economy in the short run. I think in the long run it's ended up undermining transportation and a lot of the service sector. But I don't think that's what's holding back the economy. And we did have another tax cut. It was about 1.3, although with the gimmick it's actually about $2.4 trillion. And we lost another 1.5 million jobs. So I don't, just on the objective evidence, I'm not sure that changing marginal tax rates from 39.5 to 35 is such a big stimulus. If they went from 80 to 50, I can understand that. But these marginal tax rates, I think you have a hard time making a case that people understand. It's how and we have this debate on the floor of the United States Senate all the time. I mean, I hear other people say this is the whole game, and I just don't buy it. So.
Two more questions.
Just one follow-up real quick. You know what they would say? They'd say that first tax cut was back-loaded, so it really didn't take effect, and that's the necessity of... Pardon?
That was by their
But still you would agree a mistake.
But it's their choice, and maybe...
Senator, last week, National Public Radio taped a very interesting segment here in Chicago. They came out to Chicago, in which they defined probably the most democratic city in the country, stood at a train station and asked commuters, their party affiliation, what they thought of the National Democratic Party. Invariably, every commuter they talked to identified himself or herself as a Democrat, and almost all of them were highly critical of the National Democratic Party. Do you think that this is atypical, and do you think there's a disconnect between Democrats around the country and the National Democratic Party?
There must be.
Well, are you hearing this elsewhere?
I hear a weakness in Democratic messaging, that we don't have a message, that we don't speak with clarity. That's why I believe that we ought to be beating away over and over again on the economy, because I think there's some incredible choices that have been made that I think are going to hurt the American family, American people, and I don't think that it has been put together in conjunction. Tax cuts, equal service cuts that they care about. So that's one message that I think we need to get out. And when we get a presidential candidate, the individual has the capacity that I think that individual will have, they will work on. I think we need a real debate about what are our principles in our foreign policy. Do we believe that actions are in the best interest of protecting the American people? I think there needs to be a debate about it. And by the way, I think what went on in Iraq, regardless of whether we find weapons of mass destruction or not, was a good thing, because there was a human rights violation that was unacceptable by anybody's standards. But the fact is, we need a debate about the fundamental principles of how we're going to operate our foreign policy. Otherwise, we have no basis on which to work on the international community. Anybody can have any expectations about how the United States is going to deal. And then there are these fundamental questions on social issues that go at the courts, go at privacy, and go at civil liberties that need to be debated. And I think if Democrats do that, and if they talk like Democrats, that part I buy out of the Howard Dean view. If we talk like Democrats, I think people will actually respond to it, and particularly if we do it in the context of fiscal responsibility. Of course, we are a party that believes in opportunity, we believe in responsibility, and we believe in making sure everybody succeeds. We just get out and talk about it in those contexts. In my view, this is one junior senator from New Jersey. Just trying.
Thank you, Senator.
I'm Scott Bondurant, and I wanted to just ask a question regarding the securities industry, given your background. Having worked in the securities industry, how surprised were you by the way the industry acted during the last few years during the bubble? What your thoughts are of the settlement, and if that's a good solution, and kind of where the industry, is it handicapped? Is it better? Are the rules right in terms of helping it moving forward? Thanks.
Great question. I'm not proud of everything that transpired with regard to the excesses of the 90s. You had at Goldman Sachs, we had almost 1,000 people among the 20,000 people who were police folks, so controllers, accountants, lawyers, looking after things. When money's at stake, people, historic, biblical times on to today, they are going to bend the rules. They get on the slippery slope of infectious greed, as Chairman Greenspan spoke about it, I think very articulate. And I think we failed as an industry, and to some extent, I'm not perfect in my own leadership of this and challenging some of the aggressive posturing of investment analysts, particularly in their use in soliciting equity offerings. Something that's been going on for 100 years, but I think should have been challenged, could have, with 20/20 hindsight, looks like it should have been much more questioned by the industry and the industry leadership. I think it is an exception rather than the rule that somebody talks about in stock that they are writing positive stories about, that it's really a piece of garbage, whatever was said. I don't think that is the rule. On the other hand, I think there was implied pressure for compensation purposes that is part of the industry, that investment banking and that stuff happened. And so I'm not happy with it, I'm not proud of it, and I think that we need to take steps to correct it. And I think some of the things put in place are good. The settlement, the absolute dollar amount, if that were all that were going to happen, I'd say it's not enough. $1.4 billion is a lot of money, but there's a lot of money lost and a lot of people misled. The fact is that there are going to be real tort and arbitration settlements that are going to rate that number dramatically. I think we need a capital formation system in this country, so I don't think running people out of business is a good idea. I've sold my stock in Goldman Sachs, so it's not personal. I think that it is. I don't know what the right number is, but we're within shouting distance of the right, because you're going to see an enormous amount of cost to the industry, legitimately so, going to individual arbitration settlements that come through the process.
One more.
Senator, this is not an impertinent question, but as I've read the others, you spent $62 million, I think, in your quest for the Senate between your primary and your general election. A, was it worth it? B, in 4 years from now, will you spend another $62 million of your personal wealth to achieve a re-election?
That's a good question. My kids wouldn't want that. I actually I have my own regrets about quite so much money being spent, but things that I think I've made a positive contribution on. I think it is good that people who have been blessed with the opportunities that America has provided to me, my family, feel a responsibility to participate, give back. Maybe I should have given it back in another way, but I think having a progressive voice who still believes in the markets and capitalism is a good thing in the United States Senate. I wish more business people would be involved. A few less lawyers and a little more common sense on how you get to certain situations is right. It's not. If I spend $62 million next to it, I shouldn't be elected. People in New Jersey know who I am today. I have less than 0.5%. And in recognition of the state, I was 40 points down with 10 weeks to go in the primary. They needed, at least to have a chance to compete, I had to do something. And it was right. I think in the long run it will be determined by how well I do as a representative of the people of New Jersey. And I'm thrilled to be there. I hope they're happy to be there. We will see in